Hello, this is Learn to Love Yourself or Serenity with Rosie. And today this will be the first in a series of 7. And the topic the overarching series is going to be mental health and emotional resilience. But today's topic is breaking free from the FLDS. But first, I want to take a deep breath and calm my energies, and I invite you to do the same. That our spirit guides and angels will be here while we have this conversation. So there was a number of factors when it comes to so the first topic I want to address is, how did I find the courage within myself to leave the FLDS church despite all the conditioning and the fear? And the first thing that comes to mind is my children. And being that this was a time when a lot of parents were being sent away or gone on corrections, and they were told that they were not fit to be with their children, and so their children would be raised by someone else. And it's crazy, and there was nothing legal about it. It was just the church would get a hint or a deciding factor that you were no longer a good parent, and so they would give your children more or less to someone else who they deemed was more worthy. And this happened for years, and it had been happening for, I don't remember exactly when it started. I know that in 2012, when I had my youngest, I know that it had already been going on at that point. But as far as to say when was the first time, I'm not sure. But definitely now a lot of the changes that I refer to, they were not happening. Like, I didn't grow up, and especially around some of them. I mean, obviously there were always something, but definitely after Warren Jeffs became the prophet, it was everything. It was like everything was flipped on its head. And that goes from, now we couldn't eat corn and beans because they were technically survival food, even though you were given survival rations to live on and subsist upon, because you had to get everything that you ate out of the storehouse. And this was during the same time that you could no longer have like onion because it was supposedly toxic, nutmeg, black pepper, coffee, chocolate. The list went on. Obviously, pork was clear out. We were not given an explanation, and you were not allowed to ask questions. If you asked questions, then that was a bad thing. So, being that, my children, and I was considered a non-member because my kids, at one point, my kid's dad had left the church before I did. And so myself and my kids were all considered non-members because we dealt with apostates, and that's like the worst thing ever in that church. Because if you talk to apostates, you basically can't go to hell, or you can't go to heaven. You're going to go to hell because you talk to apostates. Now, some people are like, well, what's the difference between an apostate and a Gentile? In the church I was from, a Gentile is someone who has never heard the truth, is what we were told. And so that was considered all of the world. But now, if you had known the truth and you rejected it, now you were an apostate and no one could talk to you. And I can't say that we we followed this to the letter. It was just a crazy experience. But I know that like I didn't really have a relationship with my grandparents on my mother's side because they were apostates. And I think I saw each of them, maybe my grandmother, I saw her a couple times before she died, but I know that my grandfather, I saw him once. The other grandparents on the other side, from my dad's side of the family, they had already passed away before I was born. So obviously I didn't find them, even though they were technically apostates. At least my grandfather was. I don't know about my grandmother, like my father's mother. So, being that what is what it is, that was why it was such a big thing for me. It deciding they could decide at any moment that you're not a fit mother for who knows. I mean, I know it sounds outlandish, but I know people who were sent away and got told to correct, and their children got given to someone else because they used condoms. And I mean, the list went on. I know someone who was sent on a correction mission because supposedly in their last life, they were in the army and the military. And so they had killed some people. And so I don't know that there was actually any legit reason like they would find. I think if they wanted to have you gone, then there was an excuse made and you were not allowed to ask questions. So it was all very unjust and things that, I mean, is it the saddest part is realizing how much conditioning goes into you to where you allow someone to dictate to you in your own life and what matters to you. And that is so sad and hard to understand. And I remember, even as a child, I think when I first started going to meetings, I think I was 6. And I remember I was super excited. But during that time period, I remember that they said there was going to be a test. A test was going to come, and you would not be able to tell someone the right way or the path to light. You wouldn't be able to tell them. Everyone would have to know this for themselves. And I just remember thinking it was somebody who was going to take over the church, or I didn't know as a child. I didn't understand what exactly. But it's interesting to look back now and see there was actually truth in the words. And there's actually truth in, there's bits of truth in everything. Every story that you hear, most of the time, it's not totally just false. There's little pieces of the puzzle. And yes, there's sometimes people just like to tell stories. But if it has the markings of truth that feel true, there's something generally a part of it that they would realize. And I think of my 7 siblings that are still in this church, and my heart goes out to them because I don't know what to do for them. I want to help them. I want to show them the love that I feel for them. But in the same sense, if I am to talk to them, then they can no longer be where they want to be. And who am I to make that decision for them? Who am I to decide what they want in their life? And so it's really, really hard because it's like, do I agree with it? Absolutely not. But is it my choice to make their choices for them? Which is no. As hard as it is to swallow, if I heard that somebody was actually getting physically harmed, yes, I would step in. But whereas it's just their choice, I mean, it's like people who want to eat out fast food every day. That's their choice. They have to live with the consequences of their choices. But I'm not the judge. I can't choose their choices for them. And so it's kind of the same thing is I do miss them. I miss them terribly. But do I want to harm them more? Because if I talk to them, because I'm an apostate now, that would make them not be able to be in the church anymore. And if that's what they want, then I'm impeding on their free agency. And this whole earth is about free agency. So it's kind of a sticky situation, I guess you would say. It's hard. And um, but that's just a little to explain why when the thought of my children getting taken away from me and the different things. And some people were told to go and never come back. And it's horrendous. I don't even think there is words in the English language to describe this, or any language. The amount of heartbreak, the amount of pain, the amount of frustration that you feel. And it's like the craziest nightmare you would imagine. And I know I have friends, and they ask me, they're like, well, do you mind us asking questions about the church? And I'm like, no, it's all right. I don't mind. I'm not triggered by that so much anymore. I was for a while. And I can't say the same for my kiddos. Some of them are still pretty hot topics for them. But I now that I've been able to have this distance and this time, it's been over 8.5 years, then it helps you get a little more perspective. Not that the pain is gone, but you can grasp the reality of what you had and appreciate where you've been, because that's who you are at your core. And so, but that is what was plaguing my mind when the decision to break free from the FLDS, that was part of the problem, is I did not, no matter what happened, want my kids separated from me, especially by just some church leaders that got the feeling that, oh, I wasn't a good mom that day. Because I had seen many, many women ask for help, and they were just told that they needed to get a better spirit. And so there was no justice. There was nothing. And yet we were in a prison of our own making, because it's not like they are sitting there with a gun to your head saying you can't leave. Technically, you can leave whenever you want. But it's just the mind control to drive you to stay, because the second you leave or question anything, you're instantly going to hell. And that's what you've been taught since you were little. And so after the concern with my children, there was these three things. And the first one was my kids. That was why I knew something had to change. The second reason was, which if you watched my last video, it was about my out-of-body experience when I had a near-death experience. And that was the second reason, is I knew if I stayed in that church, I was going to die. And, it's pretty easy to make a choice when the other choice is death. And so, and then the third one, there was just a feeling for me. And I'm sure it was just me, but it was just a feeling of, it was of impending doom. And that played into, and so when I'm faced with, having my kids get taken away, I'm faced with my lungs collapsing, and now I have to use a breathing machine when I slept, or just feeling my vibes and going by my own intuition. And between those three things, then I decided that, you know, if I was going to go to hell, I was going to embrace it. Heck, I'll run the place. I don't really believe in hell. I think you create your own heaven and hell by what you do and your actions. I very much do believe in karma. But it's just, I don't know. It's the craziest thing to think about sometimes. But those were the three reasons how I broke through from the conditioning, even though I was scared. I was scared to death. But those things, because a lot of times, if you can't do something for yourself, at least you'll do it for somebody you care about and love. So the next topic is, what emotional and mental battles did I face after leaving? So, when I moved up here to Wyoming, cooking for a crew of 15, 20 guys, it varied. There was another mother there to help me, but they were the ones who helped me move to Wyoming. And actually, in order to move up here, I ended up, because basically I had to get a plan. When that first happened, I had to come up with a plan. My lungs collapsed. I didn't worry about my kids. And then the vibes were just saying, this is not going to end well. It was just this impending doom feeling where I knew something had to change. And so then I started thinking and paying attention. And I noticed that there were several people going to cook for crews around. And I was like, that could work. Because I didn't want to be another news headline. I didn't want to be something that drew a bunch of attention to us. I just wanted to have freedom. I didn't want all the other stuff, because I know there's a lot of guys, actually millionaire, that takes girls from the church, publishes their story, and the girls hardly get any credit for any of it, even though they were the one who lived through the experience. And so people would basically benefit from their pain. And I did not want to be that kind of a person. I did not want to be in that kind of situation, nor did I want my children to go through that. And so I was like, okay, well, there's these crews that they're letting people go cook on. And so I convinced, I asked my caretaker first, and I don't know how many, I haven't sat down and did the numbers to find out how many caretakers I actually had. But at the time, he had me live in a 1-bedroom house with all of my kids because we were being rebellious and I wouldn't live in his crew house, which we had already done that with one of our caretakers, or several of them. One time we lived with 80 something people there was like 16 moms and 80 something people total. And they were like from 30 different families, because these were all non-members, because for some reason, the church deemed that we had to be non-members because we had done something wrong of some kind. Mine was, and my kids, is because they talked to their dad. At least that's only a definition I got given, which I didn't mind. It sounds terrible to say, but non-members had a lot more freedom than members had. So maybe I've always been a rebel. But needless to say, so I asked my caretaker, and he was like, absolutely not. You're not going to cook for a crew. And so I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, And so I went and approached the bishop, which is over my caretaker. And I convinced him that I would see my kid's dad less if we lived farther away. And wouldn't this be such a good idea for me to go cook for a crew? And so he was like, that is a great idea. And so I was like, okay. Anyway, and So he informed my caretaker I was going to go cook for a crew, and my caretaker was very upset because, yeah, I kind of double crossed him. But, you do what you have to survive. And so after we moved up here, then the challenges that we faced was, I was a single mom. In the church, you couldn't survive without being under a guy. You had to tell them everything. And so it was a whole new ball game. It was very, very scary. But it was exciting too at the same time because, getting to a new chance somewhere. And I was very spoiled because there's such kind people around where I live. And, after having cooked for the crew for 9 months, then I decided, you know what? This is a good place to raise kids. So I was like, I want to give my kids a stable foundation. And so that's why I opted to stay here. And, but for sure, my two oldest, they had a very hard time. I mean, I was already trying to adjust to this new life. And, it took us probably, oh, it was probably a couple years before we got rid of the long dresses and the underwear and everything, because there's so much stuff that's drilled into you. And just like I mentioned in one of my previous videos, how I didn't even realize how much conditioning goes into it until it had been like 4 years before I actually was like, oh my goodness. Because at that point, we were just trying to survive. We were just hanging in there doing the best we could. But my two oldest pretty much hated me for, I don't know, might have been 2 years. It was at least a year. It felt like forever. But they were very unhappy because now I doomed them to go to hell. And they didn't understand all the reasons why. And so that was a lot of the emotional things, and being the parent and trying to make the best choices for them that I could to give them a better life, because I wanted them to have the life that I never had. I wanted them to be free. I didn't want my daughter to get whisked off when she's 12 and get married to a 70-year-old. I wanted her to choose who she wanted to marry. I want all my boys to have that too. And so it's just, I don't know. Even though things were hard, I think that's what when you're going through something tough, the alternative sometimes scares you enough that it's willing to make the sacrifice. And it was hard to have my daughter hate me for a long time. But I knew that she was only seeing the view from what she could see from. She didn't understand, and she wasn't willing to listen at that point. And I remember even as my son was older, and I don't know if still he can't really wear shorts. And I know even me, I don't know. I'm not as comfortable. And I don't know, someday I'll get there. But it's just breaking years and years and years of conditioning. And it's a lot more in depth and harder than you imagine. But the big thing was I kept my eye on the goal. I kept my eye on what I wanted to have and what to accomplish. And that gave me the will to keep going. And being, having all of their things and starting public school for the first time, because I had taught them school, her 5th grade. And it's just, you teach them everything that you know, the best that you know. And then they were trying to go to public school for the first time, and how hard that was for them and frustrating. And, to see their frustration, to feel their frustration, it was really hard. So I understand. And to top that all off, then I was a single mom in a new place. And again, I was so grateful because I've had so many sweet people around me that have helped me. The third part that I want to talk about is learning to make my own choices and to hear my own voice and listen to it and my own intuition. And that was something that was definitely one of the bigger problems for me. Well, I can't say it. They were all big. That's not true. They were all big. But I still to this day will catch myself, because we were never taught to follow our intuition. We were just told, well, no, you just have a bad spirit. And you're like, but this just doesn't feel right. And they're like, yeah, but your intuition's wrong. And so you are told that so much that you second guess everything about yourself. And I mean, from the littlest things. And it's just really hard to comprehend and understand the depth of the pain and the depth of the conditioning. Because instead, then you're like, oh, I just don't feel like this is right, but you're like doing it anyway because that's what you're supposed to do. And then it's like, okay, well, that didn't go as planned. So then you're like, well, I kind of figured this was going to happen, and maybe I manifested it because I thought about it. But you know how that feeling of how things just feel wrong? Yeah, mine was broken. I had to relearn how to trust myself. And it's not, like I said, I'm still dealing with it. It's a big thing, and it's hard. But all you can do is take it one day at a time. You cannot climb Mount Everest overnight. You have to just watch the one step that's in front of you. And I know I say it and say it again, but the biggest thing is never make a life-changing decision in a dark moment. Because at that moment, your visions are cloudy. You can't see things clearly, so how would you trust your intuition? If you wait and take some time and wait for your energies to clear, and then you can make a choice. And most of the time, if it's someone pressuring you into doing it, if they actually love you and care about you and want the best for you, they will give you a minute. I'm just looking at my notes. But following my own intuition it's been a big step for me. A big challenge. And I know that my kids deal with the same thing. And I asked because I had a family member. They had one of those situations where they had their kids taken away, and so they weren't able to be with them for several years until they finally just went and gathered up their kids. They were like, this is bullshit. And so they went and gathered their kids up, and their kids were very resentful and angry. And she asked me, she's like, how did you help your guys get over this? And I asked my daughter, I says, when did you realize that I wasn't wrong for trying to help you have a new life? And she says, well, one day I was sitting at school and I was really upset because I didn't want to be at public school, and I just felt like you were just being mean. And I was just sitting there kind of being angry, and then I was remembering, because we were taught that you had to wash your right hand before your left because your left was dirty. You had to undress only with if you're putting your clothes on that are clean, you had to use your right hand. If you were taking them off because they were dirty, you had to use your left. And it just was so much control. And I mean, you can imagine trying to do all this one-handed, and we wore long underwear. So you're bouncing on one foot trying to put it on or take it off. Yeah, trust me. My friend, I was talking to her and she's like, you guys were kind of magicians. But anyway, but I asked her, I said, so when did you realize? And she says, when I was sitting in school and I was all upset. And she says, and then all of a sudden just a thought popped in my mind. And it says, who's going to know if you don't wash your right before your left? Who's going to know if you put your underwear on with the wrong hand? Who's going to know? And she said, and from then, they just ballooned. All these questions, and be like, because in the church, we weren't allowed to ask questions. And now that we didn't have that pressure of that, then all the questions could come up. And so it's interesting to see how, the hardest part, I think the saddest thing for a religion that teaches love. There's not much love. For a religion that teaches truth and honesty. And that's probably one of the saddest things is, yes, I am what I've been through. But it makes you stop and wonder, what am I holding myself back from? And you are not where you're from. You are what lessons you have learned from the experiences. Because I know people who have had life way harder than I have. They've had more experiences. And, our experiences are different. They're customized for us because they're to teach us lessons. And so then I ask myself, well, have I learned the lessons that I came here to learn? Am I learning it so I don't have to relearn it or relearn it again because I'm not listening? And so I don't share my story to be a drama queen or drastic things to explain what has happened, but more to spark an idea in your mind about how you can change your life if you believe it. Anything is possible. You are loved. Somebody is always there. How do you think I got through it? I've always had my guides and angels around me. I always have. They were always there. And that little voice is always there. You just have to listen and quiet your mind. And I know when I first tried to meditate, it was very, very hard. It took me probably, I don't know, it might have been 6 months to a year. It took me a long time to get to where I could meditate and quiet my mind. And finally, the thing that actually worked for me was I read it somewhere that if you looked at a candle, like lit a candle and like just looked at the flame, and then when your mind tries wandering off, you pull it back and just look at the flame. And that's what you tell yourself. Look at the flame. Just look at the flame. And it took me a long time, months, to where I could get my brain to pull back and pull back and pull back and pull back, because my mind wanted to jump anywhere but there where I wanted. But we are learning to control our mind, because we're the boss of it. Our mind is not the controller of us. It's useful at times, yes, but your mind should not be in control. And so I know the first time that I finally was able to actually quiet my mind, it was the weirdest feeling, if you could imagine. I could feel my brain take a breath. It was the weirdest thing. Like, it just finally was like, trying to take a breath, and just like it had been going. And so, I mean, it's no different than like people who won't relax or rest. And then you finally talk them into it and they stop for a day or a couple hours. And then it takes them a week to recover, because they're so used to being in that rat race, that hamster wheel going around and around and around. But we are in different energies now. Different energies. And this energy, the energies now are about learning to find yourself. Learning to be your truest self. Being able to show up as your authentic self. So that's what this whole thing is about. And that's why I tell my story, is because if I can do it, you can do it. We all deserve to be happy. We all deserve to have joy. So I'm just sending love to all of you and hope you have a wonderful day.